Good morning. I'm so happy to be here and to be able to share with you our Living with Compassion series. I'm Marcia Morgan, and I'm with Resilience Builders, a small company here in the Kansas City area. So, welcome to Living with Compassion. In this three-part series, we're going to start today with defining and identifying secondary trauma, the risk factors, and throughout our morning, we're going to practice some resiliency skills, right? In our second session, we're really going to do a deeper dive into the mind-body connection to secondary trauma and really look at the impact that that has on our work and life balance. And we, again, are going to just continue to practice some resiliency skills. And then in our third session, we're really going to spend time on self-care and what is resilience really, and talking about it. What does that mean, and how can we incorporate this into our everyday life, but also how can we share, and where do we go for help? So today, here's what we're going to do. We're going to define secondary trauma. We're going to talk about the risk factors, and we're going to do a little bit more exploration in terms of resilience practices. So our first resilience practice is really to get centered. I don't know about you all, but the mornings can be really, really hectic. And it's really an okay thing for us to take a few moments just to get centered and to really remember that we can take care of ourselves in this moment, right? So if you would, I invite you to put your feet on the ground, put your hands in a relaxed position, whether it's on your lap or on the arms of your chairs, wherever it is that you are, just in a relaxed position. And I want you to sit up straight. And if you're laying down, that's fine. Just let's work on staying awake still this morning. So if you would, first, let's just take 3 nice deep breaths. Eyes closed or fixed is another way to stay present in the moment. And now we're going to do a really quick body scan. And what I'd like for you to do, and I'm inviting you to do this, is just relax the muscles as we name our body parts, as we go through just recognizing where the tension is. So if you would, find the spot between your eyebrows and relax the muscles above your eyebrows and on the sides of your eyes, traveling down, relaxing our cheeks, relaxing the muscle above our lips, chin, below our chin, and then we're going to pause right at the top of our chest, right in the middle of our collarbone, right? And we're going to travel across the right collarbone onto the shoulder, relaxing those muscles in your shoulder, upper arm, elbow, relaxing the muscles in your forearm, your wrist, your thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky, up the side of your hand, up your wrist, up the forearm, elbow, upper arm, shoulder, traveling across your collarbone on the right side. And we're going to just keep going this time. And we're going to relax the muscles on the left side. So traveling across that collarbone, shoulder, upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, little finger, up the side of the hand, past the wrist. Again, relaxing the forearm, the elbow, the upper arm, the shoulder, the left collarbone, traveling across the collarbone and pausing there in the middle. And now we're going to travel down our sternum, relaxing the muscles in our torso. So all those muscles around our rib cage, just kind of relax those, continuing to do some nice relaxed breathing. Relax past our navel and into our pelvic area, pausing right below our navel. And we're going to travel this time to the right side towards our leg, but we're going to relax those muscles in our hip. And now we're going to travel, relaxing our right thigh, right knee, right calf, ankle, traveling down our foot, relaxing our toes, big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth toe, pinky coming up the outside of our foot, relaxing all the way, going past our ankle, calf, knee, thigh, up into our hip. This time we're going to travel across our pelvic area over to our left side. Again, relaxing all those muscles, relaxing our thigh, left thigh, knee, calf, ankle, traveling on the inner side of our foot, relaxing big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth toe, pinky, traveling up the outside of our foot, relaxing our ankle, calf, knee, thigh, up into our pelvic area and traveling to the middle of our pelvis. And we're going to pause there. Take a breath. And now we're going to flip to our backside, relaxing those muscles in our bottom, traveling up our spine, relaxing all those muscles on our backside that we so often forget about. And yet that's exactly where we carry the tension in our body. So again, releasing the tension on our shoulder blades, up on the top part of our shoulders, again, in the backside where we carry all that tension, traveling up our brain stem, up over the crown of our head and back to the spot where we started, right above right in between our eyebrows. Taking now 3 nice deep breaths. And opening our eyes and getting ready for our morning. So this is a centering exercise that you can do. Again, it took about 5 minutes or so. I use this exercise a lot when I wake up in the middle of the night and find that I'm having trouble going back to sleep. I use it, and usually I don't get through the whole relaxation. I fall asleep someplace in the middle. So use it wherever it fits for you. Sometimes it's just important to find the tension in our bodies and then to relax that tension. So again, think of ways that you can use this throughout your day. So for a moment, I want to give you another practice for both centering and for creating some compassion. And again, let me pause here just for a second and say, I want to differentiate between what is empathy and what is compassion. And I'm going to use a definition that came to me from the Harvard Business Review article. And they talk about empathy of feeling with, and compassion as the attitude that I'm here to help, right? So we do circle because circle can help us feel safe. So what I'd like for you to do is, and this is rhetorical, is really just to take a moment and explore, how are you feeling? And if you're so inclined, and I'm happy for you to do this, is to put in chat one thing for which you are grateful, right? And then thinking also about one thing that you accomplish every day that you may take for granted. So again, if we were live, or if this was a smaller group, we would share, how are we feeling? One word for gratitude, and one thing that you accomplish every day that you may absolutely take for granted. So I'm going to give you a moment just to think. Okay, so I already mentioned that circle is a practice that helps ground us, helps center us. Circle also promotes emotional safety. We increase trust by getting to know each other in a safe way. It also can set the tone for collaboration, which we know as we work in teams and as we work with others, that collaboration is critical. And circles can actually be very, very empowering, because we begin to recognize the strengths of the others with whom we're working. So let's talk just for a minute about, for a few minutes, about what is trauma. And we're going to define trauma in a couple ways, and recognizing that when people come to us in the work that we do, many, many people are experiencing some adverse events that they really, really don't know how to handle. So what is trauma? We define and we look at trauma as something that is happening to us, or something that we witness that is perceived as traumatic, right? So it's really important to remember that every one of us has a different reaction and a different way to account for what it is that has happened to us. So trauma is really individualized. And that's because we're born with different genetic makeup. We have different protective factors that, and I want to talk just for a minute about those different protective factors that actually help determine how we cope, right? So protective factors can be internal. So maybe it's our sense of humor, maybe it's our problem solving abilities, maybe it's our perseverance. So in addition to genes, we have those internal protective factors, and we also have different levels of support, right? So if we have a great support system, then there will be people there that will help us get through the adverse experiences. And I think when you think about COVID, part of the reason that that has become such a traumatic event for so many people is because of the isolation that we've experienced. We need others to support us, to help us through, to listen, to even maybe give us some tools, and to be there for us. So again, this is our basic definition of trauma. Now, doing a little bit of a deeper dive, we're looking at what are there. We have three different ways that we look at trauma or adverse events. One of them is private event. Well, and I'll talk about that in depth here in a minute. Another is public event, and another is community trauma. We're going to talk about all three of those. So in a private event trauma, you might think of that as in the home, could be in an institution, a school, a church. There's something that is happening to you, and it's a secret. There is consistently a power imbalance. So whether it's an adult to a child, whether it's a boss to a coworker, whether it's a healthcare professional to a patient, there's a power imbalance. We also recognize that because it's secret and because there's this power imbalance, it leads us to have this hopelessness that things are never going to get any better, that nobody would ever believe me, that as this is happening, I'm all alone. It's never happened to anybody else because I don't know. Nobody can talk about it. So there leads to a sense of isolation and irretrievable loss. The other thing that is happening to us in our bodies is that we are having this reaction. It is our fight, flight, freeze response. And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. So there are public event traumas. Think about right now, COVID is a public event trauma, right? Natural disasters, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, these extreme weather events that people are having can be public event traumas. And what that looks like is that there's this shared experience that we're all kind of in this together. It's usually no judgment is attached to what it is that's happening to us. It's about what's happening to us. There still, though, is this sense of helplessness, this sense of loss that, whoa, we can't control this. This is way beyond anything that I can do anything about, right? And we still have this significant loss. Nothing will ever be the same. So you will hear people talk about my life before and my life now, my life before and my life now. And we also will have the fight, flight, freeze response, right? That's instinctual, and it's going to happen to all of us. So our third way to look at trauma is by community trauma. And it can be a combination of experiences that negatively impact a community, right? So a community trauma could be gentrification, for example. So things that you have neighborhoods that were in disrepair sometimes and are less than. And then you have developers come in and say, oh, we're going to make this, a beautiful place for people to live and to congregate and to have experiences. But then what is happening to those folks that are there is that their rent goes up, that they don't know where they're going to live because they've lived in this area all of their lives. So it many in the community will see it as a positive. For the people who are there and who are impacted, it could be a community trauma. The other way to look at this is that there is an event that impacts a few people and it has structural and social consequences, right? So if you think about segregation of schools, right, that had structural and social consequences. Think about redlining. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, it's where developers actually created covenants as they were building homes that said African American people could not live in, and that houses would not be sold to African American people. That's redlining. And so again, it impacted a particular group of people. And it also has structural and social consequences that we are continuing to experience today, even. So again, private, public, and community traumas. So what are our responses to this? A few minutes ago, I talked about this fight, flight, freeze response that happens in almost all of these experiences. So let's talk a little bit more about fight, flight, freeze. So as we think about our reaction, our brain is wired to keep us our brain is wired for many, many, many things, right? At the lower level of our brain, though, it is wired to keep us alive. And in that primitive response system, there's what's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is our fight, flight, freeze response center. It's sort of like our fire alarm. So when we are threatened in any way, we all will have a response. We'll either fight, we'll fly, or we'll freeze. So let's talk for a few minutes about each of these. So if you are prone, and if you think back to your very youngest days that you have memory, if you can remember what you did when you were confronted or when you were angry, were you a fighter? Were you a flyer? Or were you a freezer? Now me, I'm probably most prone to be a flyer. I can remember when I was little and I got into a big fight with my parents and I didn't like the rule or whatever it was that I thought they were doing that was unjust. I packed up my little bag and I walked down the driveway and I was gonna run away. How that shows up for me in my life, even as an adult, is when I feel threatened. My first response is, how do I get out of this? How do I escape? Right? Now, if you're a fighter, your first response when you're feeling threatened may be, I'm going to confront this person. I'm going to let them know what I think. It's not that you're going to necessarily engage in any physical activity, but you're going to go on the offense, right? You're going to make sure that people know what you think and how you think. Then there's the freeze response. And that's where we really become paralyzed, and we can dissociate. Now, let me say, we all dissociate. So I'm not talking about the clinical response of dissociation. I'm just talking about, and think about this. Have you ever left work and got home and you don't remember how you got there? Or maybe you're sitting in a meeting and you in your brain, you go someplace else until somebody brings you back to the reality of what it is that's going on in the meeting. That's dissociation, right? So those are the three core responses that you will see. Now, there is another, and thank you for the question from one of our participants. What about the fawn response? And as I understand the definition or the clarification, and we've talked about this, that's another response that people will point to, and it's an appease response, right? Now, our experts in the field will say that the appease response is a learned response. It's not within the amygdala, it's at a higher level. So you may have learned that in your emotional, like in the next level, your limbic system, or you may even have learned it at the executive functioning level. So the appease response is really about, I'm going to say, or I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to get you calmed down and get you off my back, get away from this situation. I'll appease you. I'll agree with you. I'll do whatever I can to make things right for you, no matter what the consequences are to me. So that's another response. Again, our experts in physiology and biology will say that that's a learned response. These are automatic: fight, flight, and freeze. Yes, we can learn to cope and to mitigate so that we truly aren't running away or aren't, lashing out at people. We can learn to pause and move from this automatic response into the executive functioning of our brain. And we're going to talk more about that in the second session. So how does trauma present? What is it? And if you may have heard, let me also pause for a minute and say, you may have heard another word. You may have heard toxic stress. Again, years ago, as people were talking about trauma, adverse events, and the impact, our scientists, our researchers adopted the term toxic stress. Toxic stress is the same thing. It's a compilation of all those things that are happening to us, right? And it becomes overwhelming, and it overwhelms our systems. So I'm using the word trauma. If toxic stress is more comfortable for you to think of it that way, that's fine. That's fine. Now let's talk about what does trauma look like for kids? So if we have children who are experiencing private event trauma or public event trauma, or even that community trauma, they may come to us with an inability to focus, that having trouble, if you think about the school situation. So they would have trouble sitting still in their chair, right? They may not be able to stay on task. They may not be able to remember from day 1 to day 2, right? So there's some memory issues. You may see this, these extremes, either aggression or withdrawing, aggression or isolation. Maybe not in the same child. You may see some children, again, remember, they're in their fight response. So they're really thinking the only way I'm going to survive is if I lash out. And then you may have children who are withdrawing and they're either in flight or freeze, right? These are children who require and who will need significant amounts of attention, right? They need to know that they're safe. They need to know what it is that's going to be happening to them in terms of schedules or routines. In older children, you will see some self-medication. And again, you may see children who are easily emotionally dysregulated, right? So again, these are people who who may fly off the handle fairly quickly, children who are cry easily, or pout easily, and you don't really always know what it is that is the trigger for that response. It seems out of, if you think about the volume being turned up, it's like you say something and the response is at a higher volume level than what you would have anticipated. So how does trauma present in adults? It's exactly the same thing, right? So you see adults who have trouble focusing, trouble with their memory. Again, trouble with emotional responses, extremes, right? So we have people who are very, very aggressive, or people who are who we just can't seem to get to. They don't even recognize or say hello. They don't actually respond to us. Hard to make relationships with these folks. Again, some self-medication and emotional responses that are way at an extreme to whatever it is that is going on. So what is this vicarious and secondary trauma? If we know what primary trauma is, or the trauma that we're experiencing, what is vicarious or secondary trauma? So I look at it this way. I look at it is a side effect of what is happening to us in this work that we do. So when we are seeing extreme pain and suffering, we're seeing things that should not be happening to people, then our brain is actually taking all that in. If we're hearing stories of pain and suffering or cruelty, our brain is taking this in. And this can have a significant impact on our work, on how we look at things, how we see things, even how we manage our personal lives. So when we talk about symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and I'm not talking about disorder here. Again, I'm just talking about, okay, I see 5 or 6 people every day, or 5 or 6 groups every day, or maybe I see more than that, of people who have who tell me about cruelty, who are in pain, who are suffering. I may also then begin to experience these symptoms. So you may see in yourself some days where you're particularly irritable. And you're thinking, gosh, I got into this work to help people, and I don't think I'm helping anybody. And why isn't somebody doing something more? And you can go down those thought processes and have depression. You can become hyper aroused. I have in some of my work, I would see that there were folks who were in children's protective services who read over and over and over again about kids being sexually abused and are molested by a father, a friend of the mother, a relative of the mother. And the way that they coped with that is not to let their children go on sleepovers. I've had police officers who say, yeah, I'll go to a restaurant as long as I can sit in the back of the room with my back against the wall so that I can see everything that's going on. I want to be prepared. I want to know if something bad is happening that I can take care of it. So that need for being able to be responsive. We see folks who are having these symptoms maybe have lack of intimacy, maybe again having some suicidal thoughts. We know that in our law enforcement community that police officers, first responders are completing suicide more than one a day. It's about one every 17 hours. Our physicians complete suicide at that high rate. So again, risky behavior, things like driving really fast, buying motorcycles that are going to jump from one side of the cliff to another side of the cliff. We have trouble concentrating. We can even feel guilty, right? That we have that we are getting paid, or that we have we can go buy stuff, or that we have a house, because we're working with people who don't have those same things. So again, as we think about what it is that is happening to us, it's really important to think about what protective factors can we put in place that will keep us engaged and safe in the jobs that we're doing. So I want to offer a definition for you. And I call this compassion satisfaction. And compassion satisfaction is defined as the positive feelings that come as a result of doing your work. It's being fulfilled. It is not attaching to the outcomes, right? As a matter of fact, it's probably really important that you detach from the outcome. You leave work knowing that you have done the very best that you could do that day. It's also recognizing if you leave work thinking, I don't know if I didn't feel so good today. I was kind of irritable. I jumped on, a coworker. It's having the insight that that you can correct that, you can do better tomorrow, right? That you can learn something new, you can try some new things, and you will be better. But it is the satisfaction that you've done the best that you can do, knowing that you may learn something new and you'll even do better. So that's how I look at compassion satisfaction. There is also this piece that's compassion fatigue. And that's really, again, what begins to happen to us from all this work that we're doing. And that's why brief interventions, whether it's body scans, whether it's meditation, whether it's a long weekend or a vacation, our bodies need opportunity to recover and to sort through what it is that we're hearing, what it is that we're seeing, so that we can continue this really, really, really important work. Now, the other end of the spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, we have compassion satisfaction. Kind of in the middle, you might have compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress. And at the other end, you have burnout, right? And burnout is not just about the workload, right? It can also be about all these other stressors that you're having. So it might be, let's combine the workload with budget cuts, with layoffs, with increases in rule and regulation, with increases in oversight and strategy, and it could also include things that are happening at home, right? So you have all this stuff that is piling up on you, and it leads to some of those feelings that we talked about earlier of hopelessness, helplessness, power imbalance, all of those things. And you find yourself saying, I can't do this anymore, right? So what is happening to us? Why is this happening to us, right? So if you think about this, and you think about this toxic stress, our trauma, and these secondary traumatic things that are happening to us, it is actually kind of thinking like, what are the same thing that when a computer gets a virus, right? So our mind is getting absorbed with junk. And I don't mean important stuff, right? But it's rolling around. We're having dreams about the people that we've served. We're having dreams about situations we've been in. We have trouble going to sleep at night. We wake up tired and fatigued. It's all of this stuff that is rolling around in our brain, but it's not stopping there, right? So what do we do when a computer gets a virus? Well, probably most of us turn it off, right? And try to reboot. We might call in a helper, to a technician who can clean it up, make it better. And if all else fails, you get a new computer, right? So what do we do for ourselves? Well, it's important that we, again, take time, that we pause. And it's also important and can be very, very beneficial that we find some supports, whether it's a peer group, whether it's a therapist, whether it's reading, joining some folks who can help me make sense out of all of this that is happening to us. It's really important that we intervene there, because we don't have a new computer, right? We can't just throw away our brain. Some people, again, can take it to the extreme. I guess if you think about it, maybe we change jobs before we get all that way. So part of the most important thing here, and see if I can make this make sense. The most important thing that we can do for ourselves, though, is when we recognize that this is what is happening to us, is that we take an intervention, that we get a checkup, that we, take some time off, that we find ways every day to take care of ourselves. The important thing is that we don't put a cover on it and we don't dismiss it. Because one of the things, I don't know about you all, when I was younger, and I actually have a granddaughter who I think did this too. When I was younger, when the check engine light came on in my car, I just covered it up Fortunately, with one car, I did blow an engine. Don't cover it up. Think about ways that you can get support. Think about ways that you can do something for yourself. Oops. So let's go forward. So again, recognizing that in our fight, flight, freeze response, the more that we are in these situations that cause stress, that are adverse, the more that that's going to happen to us, right? So here's what's beginning to happen. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what's beginning to happen. When we're in fight, flight, or freeze, our body is signaled that there's this release of hormones, that there is adrenaline, cortisol, all of that is starting to go through our body so that we can run, we can fight, or we can become, from our perspective, invisible, right? Our brain is also creating memories of this event. Now, this works when we're in immediate danger, because after the danger is over, our body assimilates all of that all those extra hormones. If we have prolonged exposure, though, to this release of adrenaline and cortisol and all of that, then our body, there are things that happen to our body that cause long-term health problems. So here, this is just a depiction of what it is that's going on, right? So our mouth gets dry, our pupils dilate, our heart beats really hard, our lungs, we're making quick breathing. It's gotta go, gotta run, gotta get out of the way, gotta survive. Our digestive system is shutting down. We don't need to digest our food when we're really fighting just to survive, right? Our blood vessels dilate and our muscles become really, really tense, right? So as this is happening to us, right? When our digestive system is shutting down, just think about this. We aren't metabolizing any food that we've eaten, right? And what happens when we have poor absorption of food? Well, we get heartburn, and we could end up with reflux. We could end up with prolonged stomach aches. If we aren't actually digesting our food, then we will, over the long term, end up with a compromised immune system, right? So this is why toxic stress, trauma, complex trauma, this repeated stuff that's happening to us as we are serving people becomes so critically important that we take care of ourselves, right? The other thing that is happening, and I said, our heart is starting to beat really fast, right? What is happening to our heart? It is beating really fast. And our heart is actually sending messages, right? It's sending messages to our brain. It's like, we're in trouble, let's get going. And if we are in constant stress, then our heart rate variability decreases. And we need our heart to sometimes beat fast, sometimes beat regular, sometimes beat slow. We need a heart that has variability. And if we don't experience that, if we don't find ways to calm ourselves down, then we end up with long-term heart disease, right? So let's take a minute and really just pause and just breathe and just reflect for a minute on all that we've talked about. We've talked about trauma. private, public, community event trauma. We've talked about our body's response to trauma. Fight, flight, freeze, appease if you are the fawn response, if you want to include that. We've also talked about the long-term impact of taking in and seeing pain and suffering and cruelty. And we've talked about what is secondary or vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. Okay, so let's look at some resilience practices. First of all, there is grounding. So as you think about grounding, whoops, let me go back. This is a grounding exercise, right? And we think about, and a grounding, part of the way that you can calm yourself is to pivot your brain, pivot your thought process. So as we think about our grounding exercise, we want to think about, what are 5 things I can see? What are 4 things I can hear? 3 things I can touch. 2 things I can smell. And 1 thing that I can taste. So we tap into our senses, which gives our brain an opportunity to pause. And then we can go back to what it was that we were experiencing. 5 things I can see, 4 things I can hear, 3 things I can touch, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste. So earlier today, we did our body scan. And there are many, many, many body scans that you can do. Let's just pause for a moment and just breathe. So again, close your eyes and just breathe. And reflect on any tension that might have come up for you while we were sharing this information with you. And release the tension. Wherever you feel it. Okay. So a quick review. What we did today. Well, we defined trauma. We defined primary trauma and secondary trauma, right? We really just at a very high level, we talked about the impact of secondary trauma, recognizing that the work that we do, which is critically important, also may have an impact on us, and how important it is then that we take care of ourselves. We also defined the compassion continuum. So compassion satisfaction, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And we explored several practices for compassion for yourself. So the question to you, and make a note, what is one thing that you will take away from our conversation today? What is one thing you're going to think about? One thing that you're going to share? One thing you're going to try? What is one thing that you will take away from today? Just think about it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or Marissa. I will share in a second our email. And now I want you to write down, I will do one thing today for myself. What is that one thing you will do today for yourself? I look forward to seeing you next time for part 2. Hopefully you got a lot out of our time together this morning. And here are our email addresses. So if there's any questions, any comments, any thoughts, please feel free to share. We're always interested in making sure that we've presented information that is useful and helpful to you. Thank you so much for your time, and we will see you soon.